Have you ever watched a murder movie where the killer was very smart to the extent that he was able to mislead the police and deceive them, where we can say that he has reached a level where it is impossible to catch him and left the police unable to find even the simplest evidence? This story will be more like a movie. It contains a lot of events and questions with no answers. Questions that made understanding this case impossible, even after 28 years have passed. How did a wild party night in Japan turn into a bloody night and a complex murder? And what changed the course of events? Let's follow the details of today's story from the very beginning. In the year of 1995, specifically on the 30th of July at that time in Tokyo, the capital of Japan, the city was having a carnival. It is an annual summer festival, meaning it is a summer celebration that takes place every year, and they used to have it during a specific season called the Obon season. The Obon season is a Japanese Buddhist tradition that has evolved into a holiday where family reunions take place. On this day, families gather to visit the graves of their loved ones in order to remember them, so it's also considered a common tradition. However, at this time, the annual summer festival was held and food booths were spread in the streets from pastries to sweets, and people dressed in summer kimono clothes gathered to see the Japanese drumming and fireworks shows. Everyone was celebrating at night except for the employees who had to finish their shift before the celebration. And we are talking here specifically about two girls called Megumi and Noriko who used to work as employees in a supermarket. This supermarket is located in the city of Hachioji, western Tokyo. This day was exceptional not only because it was a day to celebrate, but it also was exceptional regarding work times. Because of the huge numbers that went out to celebrate, who would stop by this store, Hachioji, to buy some drinks and snacks and enjoy their day celebrating. That is why the visitors to this store on this day were exceptional. There were a lot more than on normal days. As a result, the employees' workload was higher than on any other day of the year. The main employee, who was Noriko, was responsible on this day for closing the cash registers. In addition to transferring the money to the safe, she was responsible for financial matters in general. As for Megumi, her job was to keep the sales going until the end of the day, or to the last customer. And that's when something unusual happened, when a third employee named Hiromi went to work at the store at that time and spent some time there. Even though it was not her shift on that day, she was not supposed to work because it was her day off, but she decided to come and spend some time there. Hiromi arrived at the end of the store's operating hours, and this decision that she took had a great impact in the future. Now, in order to fully understand the story, let us learn how this store operated and its working hours system, when working hours begin and when they end. This store's working hours are 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. There are usually not many employees on night shifts, just like many other shops or workplaces. And that's because during the night there are few customers, so businesses and stores employ fewer people at night. So this store, even on this special day when there are usually a lot more customers, they were operating as in normal days, not many employees in the night shift. So when it was 5 p.m. the evening shift started and the day shift ended. Megumi rode her bike to work. As for Noriko, she asked her boyfriend to drive her with his car. So Noriko arrived at work a little before 5 p.m. Before Noriko got out of the car and left for work, she agreed with her boyfriend that after work ended at 9 p.m. they would go out and have dinner with their friends at a restaurant. She said to him, "Don't forget to pick me up because I don't have anyone to take me to the restaurant, so I'm relying on you," and he agreed to that. So as I've told you, the evening shift in this store had only few employees. Half an hour after the start of the evening shift, around 5:30 p.m. a man, looked like in his 50s, entered the store. He wandered through the store without purchasing anything, then he exited the store, walked around briefly, then returned but didn't buy anything and exited again. He looked suspicious, and it was clear that he didn't have any specific purpose in mind. Then, after the last employee signed off work an hour later, and only those two employees stayed, Noriko and Megumi, their job was to stay till the end of the shift in order to finish their tasks. However, a little before 7 p.m., the third female employee arrived, Hiromi, who, as I've already said, on this day she did not have to work. This was her day off, but she decided to work until the end of the shift. As soon as she arrived, the festivities began and the workday was about to end, and the employees were waiting to finish and leave. Everyone was celebrating outside while they were sitting at work, so they are waiting to finish everything and get out. The time was 9:15 p.m. While sitting in the store, they heard the sounds of fireworks and the wild celebrations. These fireworks are like an announcement that the celebrations had begun. Now that the working hours had ended, Noriko's boyfriend arrived at the store and was waiting for Noriko to go to the restaurant and celebrate with their friends. He arrived at the store at 9:20 p.m. He noticed that the store was closed, but the main office light was on, so he waited for Noriko because he thought that they must be in the main room finishing up a few things, so it was normal for the store to be closed. because there were no customers coming. So he waited until 9:45, then he got bored of waiting and didn't understand why Noriko didn't come out yet. And what confused him more was that Noriko was the one who called him and told him that she finished work and was waiting for him, and 5 minutes after her phone call, he arrived at the store's gate, and since she purportedly finished work, and he arrived 5 minutes later at the store, she was supposed to be out waiting for him. But it was 9:45 and didn't see her, but he thought nothing of it and decided to wait for her. Perhaps something came up after she called him, which caused her to be late. So he kept waiting, but she didn't show up. That's when he thought of another possibility. He thought that she may already be at the restaurant. After some thinking, he was convinced it was what happened. So he went to the restaurant, and as soon as he got there, he looked right and left, but didn't see Noriko anywhere. She was not there. So he told his friend, who worked as an employee in the restaurant, that he thought Noriko was still in the store, since she was not at the restaurant. So he decided to go back to the store again, but his friend, who worked at the restaurant, said to him, "I will, because I feel that something is wrong," and indeed, they went to the store and arrived at exactly 10 p.m. So Noriko's boyfriend told his friend, "The restaurant employee, I'll wait for you in the car, and you go check if she is there or not." So the girl got off and went inside the store and headed up to the office and saw the door open and the lights on, but no one was there. So she returned to her friend and told him to go up with her to check it out together so they could search the whole place. So when Noriko's boyfriend went into the office with his friend, they saw something they were not expecting at all. What they saw in front of them was Hiromi and Megumi lying on the ground in front of each other, and their hands and feet tied with duct tape. Their mouths were also taped shut, and they were shot on the back of the head, 1 bullet each. They were lying in a pool of blood. The scene was terrifying. The only thing they could think of after seeing this scene was, where is Noriko, their friend, who they were looking for? Unfortunately, they quickly found the answer. On the side of the main safe, Noriko was lying on the ground after being shot as well on the back of the head. Quickly, they headed to the nearest train station, and their legs barely standing straight after what they saw, a horrible and confusing scene. That's where they found some cops and told them what they saw, so immediately, investigators were called as well as police cars to the scene of the crime. A horrible murder had taken place in Hachioji Market. The first thing the police noticed was that there were 4 security cameras in the store that can be monitored only in the office on the top floor, meaning that they do not record. But they are monitored live without recording. That's why the police did not have any footage of the perpetrator or any previous suspicious activity. It was difficult for them to determine the suspects due to the huge numbers entering the store on a special day like that. So the police began their investigation and detected 5 gunshots present in the store. When people heard the gunshots, they thought it was just fireworks. After the autopsy, they discovered that Megumi and Hiromi, each one of them was shot once on the back of the head, which was enough to kill them, and it was from a very close distance. As for Noriko, she was the only one who was beaten and assaulted. She was hit with the back of a gun on her arm and back of the head. She was also stabbed with a knife before being shot twice in the head. Now, we just talked about 4 shots, 2 shots in Noriko's head, 1 shot in Megumi's head, and 1 in Hiromi's head. But what about the 5th shot? This 5th shot was aimed at the money safe. The police were able to determine the type of gun used during the investigation, a .38 caliber handgun made in the Philippines. This type of weapon was regarded as a blow and a shock to the police because it is certain that it was smuggled from the Philippines, but this was not the reason for the shock. The issue was that thousands of individuals were departing the Philippines illegally, so how will they find the murderer among those thousands? So the traffickers who traffic those people from Philippines to Japan deliver them to criminals, or the Yakuza. Who are the Yakuza? The Yakuza are well-known criminal organizations in Japan. They also use such smuggled weapons. At this time in Japan, weapons were not widespread, nor were murders for this reason. This incident was a shock to the Japanese. At the scene of the murder, the police were looking for the smallest of evidence, and they obtained the remains of the gunshots, and some footprints caught their attention which confirmed that the murderer was wearing American size 8 shoes. They also found sweat drops and some fingerprints on the duct tape which was used to tie the victims, in addition to some things that were not usually in a crime scene, like cigarettes and a red lipstick. Those 2 things did not coincide with any of the employees working at the store, whose total number was only 20 employees. Now let's go back to the hours before the murder. The police decided to broaden their investigation by questioning members of the public and the employees who finished their night shift if any of them noticed something unusual. Indeed, there was a person who stated to the police that he was in the store at around 5:30 p.m. when he noticed that there was a person who seemed to be in his 50s wandering inside the store, then going outside and returning repeatedly, so he seemed suspicious, so he described the suspect appearance to the police as much as he could remember. There were also clients in the store who gave their statements. They stated that around 8:30 p.m. they saw some suspicious men who looked like they were in their 40s to 50s. They were wandering inside the store. The witnesses said that at this time, Megumi and Hiromi were checking some data in the register, and the last purchase was recorded at 8:56 p.m. when a couple bought some fruits and snacks. This indicates that this couple was the store's last customers, so they may have seen the criminal while he was planning his crime. But strangely, despite the fact that news of this case spread, this couple remained unknown. They did not call the police or provide any statement, and the police were unable to identify them to bring them in for questioning. But it is certain that when it was 9 p.m., the employees closed the store, turned off the lights, and went to the office. At this time, a man who lived near the store said that he was sitting in his car, then when he saw a man standing at the store in a very suspicious way, but was unfortunately unable to identify the man because he had his head down, so his facial features were not visible to him. But what is important was that the employees were fine until 9:15 p.m., since that is when Noriko called her boyfriend to come and pick her up. So the neighbor said that he was in his car and saw this suspicious man. Then he heard gunshots after 9:15 p.m., but he didn't know that they were gunshots. He thought they were some fireworks, but still sounded concerning. One of the important questions is, why did Hiromi work during her time off? And why did she come at the end of the shift? When the police investigated the matter, they discovered that Hiromi agreed to go out with the Megumi after work, so she decided to pass by at about 7 p.m., and by that time she saw that the work had accumulated on those two alone. Megumi and Noriko, so out of kindness, she decided to help them close the shop. This wasn't count as work on vacation because she was just passing by to go out with Megumi, but when she saw that only the two of them were handling so much work, she decided to help. But her help caused her to become a victim alongside them. We could say that it is her fate. Fate decided that she came on this day and become a victim like them. Before closing the shop at 9 p.m., Hiromi purchased herself some eggs and milk while Megumi was closing the curtains, tidying the place up and chatting with a woman who was shopping, and told her about their plans to go and join the celebrations after work and how excited they were. It's really sad that all this hope and excitement was going to end in minutes. The sequence of events shows that the murderer or murderers did not require much time, because from 9:15 p.m., the last known time the employees were alive, until 10 p.m., when the murder was discovered, it is a very short time frame to subjugate and murder 3 victims after tying them up, not to mention Noriko's boyfriend, who waited outside the store for about half an hour and didn't hear any disturbance. So, is it possible that the murder was committed in only 5 minutes before the boyfriend arrived? It's a little odd. The case was starting to get more and more complicated. Before we start with the police theories, let's learn a little about the victims' lives, the 3 employees, and whether they had any enemies who might be possible suspects. Let's start with the first victim, Megumi Yabuki. Megumi was a 17-year-old high school student who had a part-time job at the store to make some money. She was a baseball fan and intended to continue studying in college after high school to become a kindergarten teacher. The second worker, known as the nice employee, Hiromi Maeda. Hiromi was also a high school student. She was 16 yo. Hiromi was known to be a hard-working student. She also did a lot of volunteering, like taking care of the elderly. As for the third employee, who was the only one who had been beaten, stabbed, and assaulted, Noriko Inagaki. Noriko was 47 years old. She really stood out because her CV story was thrilling, not ordinary like the others. Only 1 month had passed since Noriko began working at the store. Rumors said that Noriko and the store's manager were dating. But before working at the store, Noriko worked as a waitress at a fancy restaurant where only wealthy customers came, so Noriko got to know some of them and make some relationships. After a while, she quit working as a waitress and opened her own restaurant. But some said that Noriko had a dark side, and she was described as cruel, ruthless, and had many enemies to the point that she'd get threats. And when they checked her residence mailbox, they found a letter that said, "If you keep doing this, you'll die." From what I understood, she was doing a certain thing, and some people threatened to kill her if she kept doing it. Worst of all, she was rumored to have ties to a lot of men who may have been members of the Japanese Yakuza Mafia, which I told you about before. Let's go back a year before this incident. A year prior, Noriko closed her restaurant for an unknown reason and started working at a school. She also had a night job to cover her expenses, until she began her night job at the Hachioji store, where she was in charge of the money safe. She'd gather the cash, transfer it upstairs to the main office, and deposit it inside the safe. Each day a different employee was in charge of this task. The only way to get to the upstairs office was an outside staircase, like the one on the screen, so the employee would take the money and go up to the office, and anyone could see him without any kind of protection. The only protection measure available was an alarm system. And it turned out that Noriko did actually activate it before going to the office, but after just 1 minute the alarm system was deactivated. The police believe that the murderer forced the 3 employees to go back to the office and deactivate the alarm. Due to lack of information, the police were confused, but through it, the police came up with 2 theories. Each of these theories needed to be tested to know which one made more sense. First, as we mentioned, this day the store made a lot of sales, and there was a high chance that the murderers knew that, and knew that the safe would have so much money. The first theory was that this was an armed robbery gone wrong, and the killers knew where the office was and the closing time, and all they wanted was to steal the money from the safe. That was their main goal. What backed this theory was the fact that this store was robbed before, not once or twice, but multiple times, and that's because the stairs that goes to the office, where the safe was a separate exterior staircase from the shop, and all the people who lived nearby knew that the office was usually not locked, and always saw the employees going up and down carrying money bags, so people knew everything. Because it's an external staircase with no bodyguards or kind of protection. And since using guns was a rare thing in Japan, and most of gun users were members of the Japanese mafia, which were known for their crimes, such as theft, so the police considered that this store was a perfect target for them. Which means that the mafia had their plan and broke in, but when they couldn't crack the safe open, one of them freaked out and killed the 3 employees and ran away. I think this theory makes some sense and has some evidence to back it up. Despite this, the other theory was a bit more convincing, especially when the police found out about Noriko's past. As we've just mentioned, the safe had only 1 gunshot, and according to the first theory, the criminal was unable to open safe, and Noriko refused to provide him with the code. So he fired 1 shot at the safe. We can assume that he did that out of disappointment. But this possibility becomes much weaker when we take into consideration that Noriko had the safe code written on the manager's desk, not to mention that the key was also on the desk. Despite all of that, the safe remained locked, and all money was still inside, and nothing was stolen. And when I say nothing was stolen, I mean literally nothing. Even these things that are easily accessible remained intact, like the victims' wallets, for example, which were still with their owners. So this introduces a new theory that the criminal decided to stage up the scene, as if it was a robbery gone wrong, that he was there to steal but wasn't lucky enough, so killed them and ran away. But when we think more deeply, we can easily discover that the main purpose was not stealing. The main purpose of this whole thing was a sole individual, Noriko. After gathering and analyzing footprints, the police discovered that the criminal walked directly from the office door towards the safe. After that, he approached Megumi and Hiromi and shot them, and then left the office. There were no fingerprints on the walls, desk, shelves, or the safe, nothing at all. Which proves that the criminal wasn't looking for anything or try and move anything around. We could say that it was a quick break-in. He went in quickly, shot a few shots, moved around the office a little, but didn't touch anything. And taking into account the fact that the criminal quickly fired his gun at Megumi and Hiromi at a very close range, but when it was Noriko's turn, the situation was different. It consisted of beating, stabbing, shooting, and assaulting. So if this indicates anything, it is that Noriko and the murderer knew each other, and there was some kind of hatred, thus she was targeted. In addition to that, it is clear that the criminal knows enough about guns, so it is really possible that he was a hired hitman sent by one of Noriko's enemies to eliminate her. So as we've already mentioned, Noriko was a stubborn person, and some even stated seeing her having a dispute with some men and yelling at them, and she had many disputes to the point where she received death threats. The Japanese police contacted the Philippines police to help them out in identifying the person who sold that gun and the one who purchased it, but unfortunately this collaboration yielded nothing. It is a fact that in any murder there are suspects, and even though evidence was quite lacking in this case, yet the major discovery that was present was the fingerprints they were able to pick up from the duct tape. Even though it was the only evidence they managed to uncover, unfortunately, it was partial, meaning it wasn't a full fingerprint. Nevertheless, the prints were picked up by the police and analyzed, and they found a match in only 8 points with a Japanese man. This man lived in the neighborhood and had a white sedan car. After digging up through his information and his criminal past, the police discovered that this man's son had an accident recently and it was his fault, and he had to pay a huge compensation to the person whom car he hit. This led them to assume that this man may have a motive to steal the money since he needed it for his son. The police decided not to waste any time and bring this man in for questioning. When they interrogated him, he did not confess to anything, and the police had to let him go since they had nothing against him, especially that the fingerprint only matched his in 8 points, and the law requires a minimum of 12 points match, so eventually he was set free. In 2005, this man passed away and the police asked to take a DNA sample from him in order to compare it with some samples they gathered from the crime scene. Yet after taking his DNA sample and analyzing it against the sample from the crime scene, they found no match whatsoever, and it proved that the man was innocent. But what happened afterwards was something that's going to make this case a lot more complex and confusing. It's something utterly shocking. Now let's go together somewhere far away from Japan, to Canada. In Canada, 2006, a Chinese man by the name of Liang He was arrested. A Chinese man that was arrested in 2006 and in 2009. While he was waiting for his execution sentence, suddenly he said something unrelated to his case inside the courtroom. Suddenly, and without a previous notice, he stood up and said that he knew who killed the 3 employees in Japan. So let's get to know this man and understand why he said that and what happened after that. A newspaper called Toronto Star shared an article about some accusations that were made against a Chinese man who worked in some Canadian store and goes by the name Liang He. This man lived in Japan from the 90s till 2002. And don't forget that the Japanese store murder of the 3 employees took place in 1995, so Liang was in Japan at the time of the murder. Anyway, Liang lived in Japan from the 90s till 2002, after which he was arrested and deported to China due to visa expiration. But while he was in Japan, he joined a gang involved in some robberies, among other crimes. And in 2002, he forged a passport with the help of his Japanese friend. Then he started dealing drugs in China. Then, in 2006, he fled from China to Canada, where he was arrested. We don't know much about his crimes, but we know that he was sentenced to death. And in 2009, while Liang was waiting for his execution sentence, he made a bold and serious statement that he knew who killed the 3 employees at the Japanese store. That's when China informed Japan and asked Canada to hand over this man because he committed forgery crimes. Eventually, in the year 2013, in November, Liang was handed over to Japan on forgery charges, but Japan's main purpose was not to follow through with the forgery charges. Instead, they wanted to know who committed the Hachioji store murders. They wanted to interrogate him and understand what he knew about the murders to find out who did this and whether Liang was involved or not. At first, they sentenced Liang to 2 years in prison on the forgery charges, but unfortunately, and throughout all that time, the Japanese police were unable to uncover any new information about the store case. Liang did not reveal anything to them because of his lawyer involvement, because his lawyer pointed out that they were accusing him of forgery, so they didn't have the right to ask his client about another case. Nobody had the right to question him, and he had the right to refrain from answering. That's why they were unable to legally obtain his statement. And even if they questioned him, they couldn't use his testimony because they weren't legally allowed to do that. They are unable to obtain a statement that they are not legally permitted to obtain, so they gain nothing useful from the whole matter. The police made huge efforts to find the murderer, but it was becoming increasingly complicated to the point of impossibility. Yet we shouldn't forget the couple who made the last purchase from the store. The police assumed they were suspects because they asked them to come and give their statements. But they didn't. We are here talking about 1995, not about 2023. Technology was not as advanced in 1995 as it is today, so they were able to know that the last 2 people who made the purchase from the store were this couple, but they had no idea who they were. What did they look like? What car they drove? They knew nothing about them. The only thing they knew was that this couple were the last people to buy from the store. This is why the police kept asking them to come forward and give their statements, but they never showed up nor gave their statements. For this reason, the police marked them as suspects. There was another reason for the police to suspect them. They wondered whether the cigarettes and the lipstick belonged to this couple, or not the husband and his wife. But this was not enough evidence to prove that they're guilty. We can only say that perhaps they were scared or had other reasons, but they are still a mystery to this day. In the end, whether the murderer was in Japan, China, or Canada, whether it was this couple or a member of the Yakuza gang, about 30 years have passed, and justice for these victims has not been served. A happy day for celebration turned in a matter of minutes to one of the most complex and horrible crimes in Japan. About 30 years have passed. If there were any witnesses, they have definitely grown old by now. Some of them might have even passed away. The murderer may also have died, be in prison, or be living a normal life. After all of these failed attempts at finding an answer, it is possible that this case will remain a mystery that will never be solved. In the year of 1998, the store's name was changed until it was eventually closed down. It has since been demolished, and a parking lot has been constructed in its place. They also erected a memorial for the victims who died in this location. We have now reached the end of today's story.